Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back. This is week 2 of Formed, our new weekly podcast here at Irving Bible Church. As always, I'm joined by Sissy Matthew and Dr. Barry Jones. If you're listening for the first time in your car, we also have the show on YouTube. We have a dedicated playlist on YouTube that you can watch the video of this and vice versa. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube and you want to share it with somebody who doesn't watch podcasts on YouTube, we also have the podcast in audio format, obviously on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Last week, we kind of talked about why the show is called Formed, but Sissy also told us about going to see Bruce Springsteen last week. So how did it go? We got to get an update.
Oh, it was amazing. So I've seen Bruce. This would be my fourth time seeing Bruce.
Oh, first name basis. Y'all
we're like that. Jersey. Yeah, it's the Jersey connection. But it was so good. I mean, he's 73, which
wow.
Maybe I had some connotations going in that it wouldn't have been the same kind of performance he's done in the past. And it was so amazing. Like 3 hours nonstop performing, like same level of energy from the first minute to the last. And it was such a great show. So excited to be there. I think I was telling you guys earlier that I actually cried in the middle of it when he started playing Thunder Road. I just started crying because it was so nostalgic for me, like growing up on like warm summer nights in Bergenfield, New Jersey, the town I'm from. It just reminded me of just being home. And so it was such a great night. I loved it. I said to another friend of mine that it is probably going to be one of those concerts that I will remember for the rest of my life. Like that good, that level of performance.
What? Barry, you go first. What kind of like concert person are you? Are you a like sit back and enjoy it, talk to people, screaming the songs?
You know, I love to sing along at shows and I love to be down front. I was actually talking with my son this morning about we had seen a band together, Wilco, that performed the 20th anniversary of an album that I love that came out when he was born, the year he was born. And then we got to see the 20th anniversary show together. And it was an amazing show, but we were like up in the balcony in a seated theater venue. The first time I saw the band, I was like 20 feet away, right in front of the giant speaker and just, amazing. Everybody kind of pressed in there together. And yeah, it was incredible.
So you're amazing. Like a mosher. You like to be in the mosh pit.
Get right down there and mix it up.
There's something about being at a live concert that is just like, it's like an experience that you don't have in other places, you know, like everybody together, like the performance, all the energy. Like, I love that. I love going to concerts.
But we are alienating all of our Gen Z audience by talking about Springsteen and Wilco. So we should.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't ask you about the Grammys for a reason. So
that's actually good. Yeah.
Okay. So this week we are talking about limits. We're talking about this subject, especially in our culture today. I feel like it is just nonstop. What can you accomplish? What can you get done? Pushing the hours of the day. I went back and watched the trailer. If y'all remember, there was a movie that came out called Limitless with Bradley Cooper. Brad Cooper fans?
Yes.
Okay.
See that commercial? Super Bowl?
I know.
Bradley Cooper, though, I watched and this is a couple of quotes from it. So the idea of the movie Limitless was he can take this tablet and basically it enhances, he can use the rest of his brain and it just pushes all the limits that you could possibly have as in the human body. And he's like, I wrote a book in 4 days. He said, and they had a quote in there. He's like, this is the perfect version of ourselves, is like this limitless type of thing that you could take a tablet, a peel, and not have any limits in your life. And they asked the question at the end of the trailer, is it worth the risk? And I was like, oh man, I haven't even seen the movie, but I just remembered that when I was like, I know we're going to talk about limits. I remember that movie. So
you got to watch it. It's pretty good.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay. So this topic of this, you know, even the title of the podcast, this embracing these limits in a nonstop culture. Barry, you preached a sermon on this back, I guess 2 weeks ago at this point.
Yeah.
And I want to read a quote from Pete Scazzaro first, and then I'm just going to kind of toss it over to you about why we're talking about this subject. Pete says, emotionally healthy people understand the limits God has given them. As a result, they are not frenzied and covetous, trying to live a life God never intended. They are marked by contentment and joy. Emotionally healthy churches also embrace their limits with the same joy and contentment, not attempting to be like another church. They have a confident sense of God's good hand in their church for such a time as this.
Yeah. I think about just the whole idea that we're pursuing with this podcast is be formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world. And that requires us to learn to live within our limits. Mm-hmm. And yet I think we all find ourselves desiring to sort of live that limitless kind of life. We don't like to admit that we have limits. We often live as though we don't. And it seems to me this goes all the way back to like the origin story that you find in the Bible. Like God gave this incredible abundant provision and gave them one limit and said, trust me, right? Trust me that this is good for you. And I think our limits are invitations to trust. And yet we want to be self-sufficient. We want to push against those limits in our lives. And so this is part of being formed in the way of Jesus, actually recognizing Jesus himself had limits, which is right. Sort of, we don't oftentimes like think about that, but as the fully human, fully divine, right? As the God man, Jesus had limits and Jesus lived within his limits. And so to become more like him means we've got to learn to do that too.
Yeah, when I think about that, something I often have to say to myself is, there is a God and I am not him.
Yep.
Because I desire so much to blow past my limits. And it's this idea that I am limited and God is limitless, unlimited. And often I want to be limitless because I'm seeking to be my own God. If I'm really honest, at the core of it, that's what's happening. And yeah, you go back to Genesis 3 and Adam and Eve in the garden. It was a lack of trust in God, that God doesn't actually have the best in mind for me. So let me take control of the situation. Let me use my own strength and my own power rather than trusting in God. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part, what I find in my own life is often the reason I blow past my limits is it's misplaced identity. Right? And we see this, I think this is the message that the world tells us. You go after it, do everything you can, work as hard as you can, do everything because you've got to accomplish. You're finding your value in your achievements. Or maybe it's not that for you. Maybe it's, I need to get people to love me or approve of me. And so I got to do all these things because I'm seeking my value in those places rather than resting in the fact that I'm the beloved daughter of God. And in these subtle ways, we do that, whether we recognize it or not.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of say, oh, that's just for the business corporate world.
Sure. Yeah.
and it's not, right?
No.
Like, why do you think the grind or the hashtag team no sleep? Why do you think that has become so popular in today's culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's a human thing and a culture thing, and of course those go together. But the human thing, I mean, is kind of some of what Sissy was talking about. Is we are seeking that sort of ground of our identity, right? That we are always looking for what gives me a sense of value, of worth. And oftentimes that is driven by that sense of achievement, accomplishment, affirmation from other people, how other people see me and respond to me. And so there's this drive to do more, accomplish more, because then I'll matter. Right. And so that's kind of the personal, individual, human component of it. But then culture is like the human tendency writ large. And I think about even things like technology, right? Technology is an attempt to overcome a limit. Like you think about all the way back to the invention of the wheel, right? It's an intent. It's the overcoming of the limit of how fast I can get from one place to another by walking. And all technology is an attempt to overcome a limit. And when we have so much technology that drives our lives now, there is this thing in me that says I shouldn't have to be limited in this way. I ought to be able to overcome limits in my life. And so there's a famous old line from, oh my goodness, the Medium is the Message guy. I'm blanking on his name.
Wait, we got to pause in this moment for a second because Barry forgot who a quote was from, and I just want to soak that in for a second. When I forget things,
Dr. Jones is a little rusty.
He's got a slide on it.
A little rusty.
Yeah, he's got a PowerPoint.
He has a PowerPoint.
So I used one quote to get to the name for the other quote, but he talks about this idea like we shape our devices, and then our devices shape us.
Yeah,
right. And I think that, and that does. I'm not trying to be sort of anti-technology by any stretch. It's just that recognition that in some ways, a cultural environment so pervaded by technology sort of shapes us to think I shouldn't have limits. I ought to be able to overcome limits.
Yeah. I got to do some Maverick stuff, over the past 6-7 years, and getting to know some of these professional athletes and just the amount of money they make sitting there talking to a guy. I got to know Harrison Barnes, who is a strong believer in everything. But I remember just sitting and talking to him one day in a locker room, and I'm like, you literally get like $24 million this year, but just to hear these testimonies of their stories of, well, they still have problems too. Like,
right.
You might look at it in the sense of, hey, or hearing these professional athletes talk about, oh man, before I had the money and now I have all this money. You have all these limits before, and it's like you don't like the feeling of having limits on you. Or then you get, we're just using money. You get all this money. And it's like, well,
it's
now I can
enough.
do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Like there's no limits.
Yeah.
And then they still have the same problems, just like we do. But it's that kind of, I don't know. It's kind of like a Thanos, like you get another stone. It's like, I'm just all powerful. Yeah. You kind of desire that. So you just want to push. You don't like feeling limited.
Yeah.
And the concept or what you're talking about is that feeling doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's to be a positive, to be embraced.
It's an opportunity to practice humility, right? To say, I am limited. I am finite. I am fully human. And an opportunity to trust God, right? Like to say, okay, Lord, I'm up against my limit here. I'm trusting you.
Yeah.
And I think that we find that invitation anytime we bump up against those limits in our lives.
And I think our limits actually lead freedom. And I think that's the thing that we blow past our limits because we think it's going to lead to greater freedom, more becoming who we are. And yet it's in our limits. It's sitting in those places that we learn to trust God more, that we're relying on his strength and not our strength, that we're recognizing who we really are as sons and daughters of God rather than trying to do it ourselves.
This might not be as simple of a question, but if somebody's listening to this and they're saying, yeah, but I've kind of heard like, hey, you got to push your limits, to be better at something. Yeah. How do you know when a limit is to be embraced or when to be pushed and to expand that limit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, I come back to the great serenity prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? And so there are those limits in our lives that we really can't change about ourselves, right? I'm an introvert. And so that is a certain kind of limit based on my personality, the way that God has wired me, the way that God has designed me. I only have so much to give in social settings, and it's gonna drain me, it's gonna wear me out. Doesn't mean I don't show up, but it's just the reality of a particular kind of limit of my personality. but then there are those things that say, God, give me the courage to change the things I can. So my current level of spiritual or emotional maturity is something that I have some kind of control over, right? That I have some agency where I can do something to help grow, to help expand, to help deepen my spiritual and emotional maturity.
Yeah.
So that's kind of within my power to do something, asking God to do it in me, right? It's not me by myself, fixing myself, changing myself, transforming myself. It is me engaging with God, saying, God, work in me and change me. And so that to me is a helpful way of thinking about it. What are the things that are limits that I have in my life that I really don't have agency to change? And therefore is an opportunity to practice humility and an invitation to trust in God. And then what are those areas of my life that I'm limited by, but that I have some measure of, I can do something about this. And sometimes I think there's probably some gray in between those two. And that's where okay, Lord, help me to discern the wisdom to know
what
the
it
difference.
is. Yeah. I think I ask myself two questions when I think about, because I think that's a really great question, because sometimes it is hard to know, is this a limit I should embrace? Is this a limit I should try to break through? So one question is, what's the motivation of my heart? So am I trusting in myself or am I trusting in God? Am I looking for my identity in my achievements, my accomplishments, in approval from others, or am I resting in the fact that I'm a daughter of God? So what's my motivation? That's a really helpful question to me. I think the second question is this a limit of immaturity in my life? And that's a little bit of what you talked about, Barry, and what do I have agency over? So an example I might use is, let's say you don't like conflict. Most of us don't like conflict, but you tend to avoid conflict. Well, that might be the Lord inviting you to break through that, because this is an opportunity for you to grow in that area. And so it's what you said, it's discerning between, is this something where God is using this to grow me, to become formed in the way of Jesus? Or is this a place where I should be resting in the strength of God rather than my own strength?
Yeah. Barry, you used a passage a couple of weeks ago in this message in 2 Corinthians. How does that passage play into the subject?
Yeah, so the passage is from 2 Corinthians where Paul is talking about this thorn in the flesh. And I've loved this passage from the time I was a teenager when I first discovered it, because there's something there when Paul talks about this thorn that he experiences. And, scholars have spilled a lot of ink trying to determine or guess what Paul's thorn may have been. But I think there's something brilliant about the fact that he doesn't identify it, because all of us can relate in some sense to this idea that he has this thorn in the flesh. And we kind of can think maybe his was kind of like mine. Right?
Yeah.
And Paul says he pleaded with God, take it away, take it away, take it away. Like, I could do so much more. I could be so much better. If you just took this away, life would be, and yet God's response is, my grace is sufficient for you. I'm enough for you. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. So Paul shifts and says, therefore I boast all the more gladly about my weakness, hardships, trials, persecutions, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Right? It is actually when we find ourselves in circumstances where we bump up against the limits in our lives, when we find ourselves in circumstances that we are, our weaknesses are exposed, that we actually have that opportunity to then really discover and experience God's strength in our lives.
Yeah, I think the thing I think about when I think about that verse is what Jesus talked about in this idea of abiding. I can do nothing apart from him. I mean, the truest thing about us is that we're the beloved sons and daughters of God. And that happens when we make our home in Jesus and with Jesus. And so I think when I think of my life, the places where I have seen God's power most clearly in me and through me is in my areas of weakness, because that's where I don't have a choice. I have to trust in God, and I can't do it out of my own strength. And I think that's what Paul is talking about. I think one of the things you even talked about in your sermon a couple of weeks ago that really resonated with me, was such a good reminder, is this thorn in the flesh was given to him by God.
Yeah.
That sometimes God does put those things in our lives where it's an opportunity. Again, there's so much potential for us to meet in that place with God that maybe we wouldn't experience God in that way if we didn't have that thorn in the flesh or that area of weakness.
It's been really interesting to me in preparing this this teaching on embracing limits. I was just having debilitating back and neck pain, and my shoulders, and just where it was really hard for me just to sit at the computer and write. And I've got some relief from that now, thankfully, but it was really interesting to me to be processing through this whole idea of limits that we can kind of wind up talking about in abstractions.
Sure.
When I was actually really experiencing physical limitation, physical weakness, but the way in which that drove me to prayer, to dependence on God. And I feel like God really met me and shaped, formed me through that work on this message in the midst of this limitation. And in some ways, I think part of the reason that people seem to have really connected with it is precisely because this is deep work that God's doing in me in real time as we're talking about this. This isn't something that we're talking about merely in the abstract.
Yeah. Sissy, do you have a moment in life that you think of, whether it's recent or in the past, or you're saying, all right, I hit my limits, and that was a moment that I needed to realize that I needed to embrace those limits instead of viewing them as an obstacle?
Yeah, I think most of what I do in ministry, if not all of what I do in ministry, is out of my weakness. Like, I always feel like I'm operating in that space of, God, I don't have this. I don't walk up to a stage to preach a sermon saying, I got this. I just don't have it. And I'm just praying that God works through me. And I have seen, and when I yield myself to him and really surrender, I don't know what you're going to do with this, but I'm going to do the best I can, that God really does work. But the instance that I share with you is something that happened to me just last week. So last week I had about 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, even while we were recording that first episode, where I just was feeling terrible. Like it was allergies or a head cold. I just felt horrible. And my boss, our executive pastor, Brian, had asked me a few times, like, hey, you don't sound good. You don't look good. Sure, you're okay. And I said, I am going to plow through this. I am not going to be sick. I am going to plow through this. And I just kept saying, I've got stuff to do. I'm going to get it done. I am not going to be sick. So I did that Monday, Tuesday, just feeling horrible. Wednesday, I'm at home. I take Wednesdays as a work at home day to study, sitting on my desk, a box of tissues, like tissues everywhere. It's just nasty.
You were pre-crying for Bruce.
Oh yeah, and I was getting worried that I wasn't going to be like feeling well for the concert, all these things. And I'm sitting there, and I just had this moment where I felt like the Spirit saying to me, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing?" And I stopped and I thought, why do I feel like I have to plow through this? Why do I feel like I can't be sick? I'm not going to allow this to be a limitation. And as I was really honest with myself and with the Lord, I had been out from work for about 2 weeks, just caring for my mom back in New Jersey. So I felt like I was behind. I felt like I was disappointing my team. I didn't want to disappoint Barry and Brian. Not that they'd even placed those expectations on me, but I had all this stuff that was going on, and I wanted to feel productive because that's where I was finding my value. I'm not good enough if I'm not accomplishing these 100 things. And so it was such a moment for me to just stop and say, none of that is true. That's not where I should be finding my value. And so I just had this moment where I just sat there and said to the Lord, like, I am your beloved daughter. And that's the truest thing about me, not how much I would get done on my list or, how well I'm doing in my ministry or all these other things that I'm placing value on. And so that was an opportunity for me, one, to recognize how I'm not embracing my limits, and then to pause and say, that's not how I want to live. And God is so much better for me in actually embracing that physical limitation that was for a few days.
Yeah.
And yet really profound for me.
I remember a moment really clearly. It's from a number of years ago now, but it's really had a significant impact connected to limits, a kind of practical limit that we all experience, which is limits with regard to time and energy, right? And So we were having a gathering with pastors and elders here at the church, and we had a speaker, a woman named Ruth Haley Barton, who's a fantastic author, and she used a little phrase that was just like an arrow penetrating my heart. Right, the little phrase was simply the idea of sane rhythms of work and rest. Mm-hmm. And I just was like, oh, because I knew at that time, in that moment, I was not living sane rhythms of work. I was living insane rhythms of work and rest, right? And so it just really hit me and was connected to my then deliberate decision to really lean into the practice of Sabbath keeping and taking a day, a 24-hour period where I'm just shutting down and I'm doing nothing but resting and really pursuing those things that are renewing for me. And Ruth talks about the idea that Sabbath keeping is practicing the limits of our humanness, right? It's like it is deliberately acknowledging I have limits and I need to live within them. It's a practice of our limits. And boy, that has really impacted my life in pretty profound kinds of ways. Practicing the limits of our humanness. Sabbath for me is a discipline because it's a reminder that God is sovereign and I am not.
Yeah.
And that God's going to keep this world spinning and he's going to take care of the church and he's whether I'm contributing anything to it or not. And it's a really great practice of living within the limits of time and energy that all of us experience.
Yeah. Let's start on the end here and we'll go all the way down for the last kind of comment about limits. What would you say to somebody who is listening to us right now? They're driving in their car, they're watching on YouTube, and they're running on fumes and they're saying, guys, this is me. Like you're talking about me. I'm hitting all the limits. Yeah. It feels like everything is hitting me. I'm falling down. I'm trying to get back up. What would be your word of encouragement to them about what a next step is or what that first step could be for them?
Yeah, I think it's going back to what are the motivations of your heart and what are those places where it's an opportunity. Again, it's an opportunity. That opportunity is filled with potential for you to meet with God in a way that perhaps you would not before. And so, we use these words like invitation. That's really what it is. We don't have to do that. And God's inviting us into this deeper place of trust with him. And so kind of looking at those places of where am I needing to trust God in deeper ways and how might that lead to greater freedom in my life?
I've found myself prone to repeating sort of in my own self-talk, just reminding myself sometimes it is what it is and I am what I am. Right? And not in a cynical, dismissive, well, it is what it is, but just as that reminder to myself, like, this is reality. I am limited. I am human. I am finite, and that's okay. Right. It is what it is, and I am what I am. So there's that opportunity to practice humility, and then to say, God, help me.
Yeah.
Right. It is an invitation to trust God more deeply when I bump up against the limits of my life. And so I'm weak. You are strong.
Yeah.
Be strong in me. I need your help. I need your strength in my life. And that's when we really come to deeper places of knowing and trusting God in the details of our lives.
And I think the other thing I'd add is I think it's going to feel countercultural because it is. Even when we talk about Sabbath keeping, it's been said that Sabbath is resistance. I think embracing our limits is resistance because the world is telling us the messages that we're getting from all over the places. No, you can do this. You can blow past your limits. And yet I think God has something better for us.
My mother's a gardener. She's had plants her entire life and a gift shop and everything. When I was younger, she taught me the process of pruning and giving me, it's a tool and saying, all right, you got to help me. You got to help me go out there and prune. And that's what I would say to the person is, what do you have to prune in your life? Because you prune so a new flower can come on display.
Mm.
And it's like pruning might take time. It will take time. I remember as a kid not wanting to do it because I'm like, it's so boring. I'm gonna have to go out here and like cut all these dead branches off or dead blooms off and to allow a new flower to come out. And in a sense of it's going to take some time. It might even be hard at times, but you might have to prune something in your life so that the other things in your life could bear more fruit or a new flower. So
It's good.
all right. It's Valentine's Day.
It is.
Let's talk about, okay, just off the top, rom-coms. Do we have any? Do y'all have a favorite rom-com? Because, I mean, I'll go first while you think. The Proposal is, I mean, Sandra Bullock, Ryan Reynolds. We watched it again the other day. I'm here for rom-coms. I'm all in, and that's just one of my favorite rom-coms. I could watch it anytime Barb wants to watch it. I'm down. Do y'all have a favorite?
So this is one of those places where we're gonna alienate our younger listeners again.
Yeah.
Here
All
we
the
go.
rom-coms that I think of are like from 20 some years ago.
Yeah.
I think so.
Gone with the Wind.
Not that old.
So I don't know. I mean, Kim and I used to love watching rom-coms together. Have there been that many good rom-coms? of
Sleepless in
late? It
Seattle.
feels like, like, I don't want to go all the way back to there.
You've got
but,
Mail. That's a good one.
That was
a good one.
certainly
Yeah.
a beloved one back in the day. So
Sissy, do you have one?
I'm not sure I have a favorite rom-com that I'm thinking of. I think I'd like really date myself if I just mentioned anything I like. So I've already dated myself enough in this
That's
episode.
right.
Okay, so I have the Today Show did a list, and I'm going to throw out some things for you. They did this list last year of 20 best first date ideas. So I'm not going to go through all 20, but I'm going to throw out a couple because I want to get a feel for you guys of, hey, what would be a good first date? So, are you ready?
Ready.
I think so. I'm not sure.
Tell me, yay or nay, you would be a fan of this or not, and y'all have to say it at the same time. Would you be down for a coffee date at a bookstore?
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah, okay. Lock it in. Here you go. Pick something from a farm.
Wait, that's the thing that you do?
Yeah, like you could go to like an orchard and like, hey, you want to go pick apples?
First date though?
Yeah, no.
I could
I've picked things from farms.
Sure, that's like later on.
yeah,
that's another stage of dating.
That's next level.
Yeah.
I could see Dr. Jones doing a little play on words at the apple orchard. Like, hey, you know who picked this apple first?
Oh, my.
So engage in friendly competition.
Yay.
Nay, I'm not super competitive. No.
Yeah,
Sissy,
I mean,
you'd
I
be
have
down.
done that on first dates. So
So like axe throwing.
Yeah. I don't want to put my limits on display in the first date, right?
Hiking.
Yeah.
So here's why I don't like that as a first date is because like
stuck out in the
you're
middle
stuck.
of
Yeah, what
nowhere.
if this is going bad? I've got no way to get out of this.
Yeah.
Like,
That's true.
Yeah,
And you're all sweaty and nasty and everything.
right? You're trying to put your best foot forward here, and that's probably not.
Barry, according to the website, you love mountain biking or
Oh gosh.
fun fact about our website. So a long time ago, there was a bio written about you about some things you like to do.
My mountain bike has developed some rust since
biking
since
and
the bio was first written.
you know what's great is when you have the senior pastor's son as an intern. So like we're talking about,
He outed me.
and we're in the meeting one day that Barry is not in, and we read his bio, and Barry's son, Will, is like, what? He doesn't
When
mountain
did he do
bike?
that?
And I'm like, what? It's been on the website. Is this
Back in the day, I did enjoy a good mountain bike ride, but it's been a while.
Okay, would you swing by a museum or an art gallery on a first date?
I'd say yay.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Is it bad that I'm out on art galleries? Like, what do you do at it? You just stare at the wall?
We need to take you and kind of give you some culture.
Yeah. We need to culturize you.
Give me some culture. Would you take a class together?
No. Not on the
So
first
you're
date.
out on like the whole like cooking classes.
Oh, I mean, that
first
would
date?
be a lot of fun, but that does not seem like first date material.
You're gonna like argue the first date, right?
Well, yeah, because again, limits, right? I want to show my best. Like, here's who I am.
I saw this one on this list. Remember, this is the 20 best. They said try an escape room.
Oh, that could go really bad.
I know. That's
Yeah.
I don't have much escape room experience. So I'm not sure.
So I enjoy an escape room and I get super
I
competitive.
thought you were about to say you did this on a first date.
No,
I was like,
I did
oh.
not, because I don't think it could, if they weren't very helpful, I'd get really mad about it. And so it wouldn't be good.
I know. I'm like, what's the best
Yeah,
case?
their intellectual limits get exposed on the
Like
first
that.
date.
Some of those escape rooms is like tag team, like somebody does something so the other person get out. And if you don't like the person, you just leave them, I guess. But
I guess, yeah.
just like bounce and you're gone. Attend a trivia night.
I'm kind of in the middle on that one.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some trivia night experience, but very limited.
Yeah.
It was fun. I'm not sure that would be first date
Again,
material.
it's like first date.
Yeah.
I might do that later on.
Yeah.
What would be the trivia subject that you'd be the most confident in?
I'm confident in all the stuff that, like, useless information, I am the queen of. This stuff doesn't matter, but I'll know it.
Okay. My notes just disappeared, but we have to do this last thing. Sissy, we're going to figure out when you're going to meet your soulmate.
Oh, all right.
So-
I'm in for this.
So on
Okay.
BuzzFeed, incredible website for random dumb quizzes.
So we're determining this by BuzzFeed. This
By
is my
BuzzFeed.
soulmate future.
This is the
Brought to
title.
us by
Brought to
BuzzFeed.
us by BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
This is the title of the article that made me click on it. Pick your favorite cheese, and we'll tell you when you'll meet your soulmate.
Well, this is part of my problem. I like all kinds of cheeses.
Wow.
Like,
There's a lot of cheese on here,
Yeah.
so instead of me listing them, give me what cheese is your favorite. I don't even know how to pronounce some of these.
I would say my go-to cheese, I guess it would be my favorite cheese. I love a good brie, but I
Okay.
also like manchego.
Mhm.
Wow,
Both good choices.
manchego is not even on this list.
Is it not?
No,
Your soulmate is not
Yes.
Spanish,
We've
apparently.
got like American cheese on there. Like, what kind of cheese is on there?
feta,
Velveeta?
Yeah.
Munster. All right,
Munster.
you want to go with brie?
I'll go with brie.
Let's go with
What
brie.
does it say?
Sissy's going with brie. Here we go. Sissy will meet her soulmate in 2 days.
Wow.
Yes. Okay.
Oh.
Let's come back. Is that come back to me
Wow.
on
Yes.
Thursday?
Next
Okay.
episode.
Thursday.
When you're listening to this episode, I will have met my soulmate, according
I
to
did try it out
BuzzFeed.
earlier just to see if it works, and another answer said 3 weeks. So it's not like they all say 2 days.
So anywhere between 2 days and 3 weeks is
Well, that's what I
Well, with
picked.
the different cheese, it was
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Got it. All right.
But brie.
Brie is 2 days.
2
Let's see
days
what
on
happens.
Thursday.
Thursday's
We'll see what
Thursday's my
happens.
day.
All right.
We'll update you next week.
With a first date that could be going to one of the places we talked about. But guys, that is week 2 of Formed. And hopefully, you learned something today about limits and embracing your limits and not viewing them as obstacles. And so if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching or you're listening in your car, subscribe, share it with somebody this week that you know. And thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.